Good afternoon. We are continuing the Section 59 investigation. This afternoon we have the National Health Care Professionals Association. Can we start with recording those who are present? Tell us who their names are and in what capacity they are here. So we should probably start with the gentleman sitting at the front there.
My name is Josiah Snyder. I'm the Gauteng chairperson for the NHCPA.
I'm Dr. Thandi Ngcukaitobi, the Deputy Chair, Gauteng.
I'm Advocate Counsel for the NHCPA.
I'm Dr. Kumere, the Chairman, National Chairman or Chairperson of NHCPA.
Thank you. Mr. Buteles, what is the plan? How are you going to present your submission? Because those who are presenting, we would like them to take an oath.
Chair, the submissions are in 3 parts.
Yes.
The first part would be by Dr. Kumete with regards to the topics that we've covered along the lines of our own overview of our perspectives on medical schemes. And then after Dr. Kumete will be myself. I will be doing an analysis on how the forensic audits are a violation of Section 59 and other legislation. And I will also do the section on racial profiling. And in closing, Dr. Kumete will close in terms of recommendations to the panel.
All right. So the only people who will be speaking is yourself and Dr. Kumete.
Indeed, so, Chair.
Now, the portion that you will be addressing, will that include facts or will you just be making submissions?
We've got legal arguments supported with evidence, Chair.
All right. I don't want to get counsel to take an oath, but I don't want to get facts here either that are not taken under oath. So you should decide how to do. I have no problem with you making submissions based on facts that have been introduced by Dr. Kumete. Anyway, shall I start with the non-controversial part, which is Dr. Kumete? Dr. Kumete, are you going to take an oath or the affirmation?
Good afternoon, Chair. I'll also will ask my the guys that I work with also to read an extract from my presentation. So I'll request that they are also being under oath.
You're sworn in?
Yeah, sure.
No, that's fine. Okay. Who will be doing those? I mean, just choose among your team.
Yeah.
There are 2 sitting that side. Okay, very good.
They just read an extract, yeah.
Thank you. Shall I start with your oath then?
Yes,
Would you say after me, I, and then your name?
I, Donald Kumete,
swear that the evidence that I shall give
swear that the evidence that I should give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth.
the only truth.
Raise your right hand and so help me God.
So help me God.
Thank you. And I take the next oath now so that there's no problem with speaking. Yes, sorry, just, will you just say after me, I, and then your name?
I, Dr. Thandi Ngcukaitobi,
swear that the evidence that I shall give
swear that the evidence that I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth.
the whole truth.
Raise your right hand and say, so help me God.
So help me God.
Thank you. And you are not going to be speaking. Thank you. So it will be, so it's Dr. Ngcukaitobi? Dr. Ngcukaitobi? Okay, very good. All right. So Dr. Kumete, the floor is yours. You can direct us about how you want to structure your presentation.
All right. Thank you very much. During the break or the lunch, I submitted files which are probably sitting at your table.
These are the,
yes,
the green files?
Yes, sure.
Yes. Okay. Are these the submissions that you already made?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh,
no,
you
we,
printed them?
we had them printed
Oh,
out.
wow. Oh, thank you. Then, all right, sure.
But nevertheless, thanks. You are the first person to run copies for the panel.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll just read through and then. Oh, my counsel was requesting if we could borrow the ones that we had given you to give other members who would like to follow and read. Yeah. Thank you very much. Like it has already been stated, I'm the National Chairperson for the National Healthcare Professional Association. We probably will say we are responsible for causing this storm, probably. Though we shouldn't be proud, but we are very proud that the storm is here. So it can start raining from now. Thank you. NHCPA was formed in 2006 as an organization intended to advance and advocate for the interests of healthcare professionals in South Africa. The need to establish an alternative body to represent healthcare professionals was realized by Dr. Kumede and Dr. Prudence Buthelezi, who spearheaded the establishment of the National Healthcare Professional Association. The initial purpose was to address the challenges faced by the private medical practitioners in their dealings with medical aid schemes. But it soon became clear that all healthcare professionals have similar assistance, whether they're in private or in public. NHCPA was, National Committee was elected or is led by a chairperson and the secretary, treasury, and 4 other members. The provincial structures are led by provincial committees led by the conveners for each provinces, which are 9 of them. The membership of NHCPA consists of a broad spectrum of independent practitioners, such as doctors, dentists, optometrists, medical technologists, psychiatrists, physiotherapists, and etc. At a recent count, we have an average membership of around 2,500 members. Our growth as an organization has, in a recent week, grown exponentially as more people became aware of the organization challenging against medical schemes, as well as the establishment of the Section 59 Investigation panel established by the Council for Medical Schemes. There can be no doubt as to our role, our organization as, there can be no doubt as to the role our organization has played in the establishment of this inquiry. Thus, as an organization, we appreciate and welcome the opportunity to make this submission and submit that the establishment of the Section 59 Investigation panel has been long overdue. In our earnest hope, it is, it is our earnest hope that following on the inquiry, health professions in South Africa will again develop a sense of pride in serving the health needs of our community. At present, a great number of health professionals are explicitly under siege and working on eggshells from the prevailing climate of mistrust, hostility that we submit has been created by the big medical schemes acting in concert with each other. As a group of mainly black healthcare professionals of varying disciplines, all we strive for is to be able to render our services where they are needed in an environment that is prioritizes medical ethics and patient care, recognizes us as proper qualified professionals, is conducive for us to prosper as professionals and is founded in the constitutional values of equality and dignity. A number of points on constitutional values will be canvassed in more detail later in this submission. At this point, however, we ask that the investigation panel remain alive to the constitutional ethos of our country and in all its deliberations and decisions. As a country, we come from a place where a lot of professions were represented here today, where the exclusive privilege of a certain demographic by design. The University of Natal and Medunsa were the only institution that granted access to medical students of color, as there existed the notion that people of color were either not intelligent enough to be trained in certain fields or were not a desirable person in those fields. It is therefore most concerning that 25 years after the supposed official destruction of segregation policy of marginalization, we find ourselves here to ventilate a similar form of marginalization of black medical professionals that many perceive to be designed to push us to the periphery of the industry, if not excluded us completely. We undertake and commit to be of assistance to the investigating panel whenever and wherever we are called upon to do so. We also plead with CMS that the investigating panel be given a space and support to do its job without any interference and obstruction. We implore the investigation panel to be thorough and robust in how it approaches all issues. As an organization, we will follow this inquiry very closely and are confident in the credentials and independence of the members of the investigation panel to yield a just outcome for all parties that will form objects of this inquiry. As directed by the terms of reference, we will best endeavor to confine the thrust of our submission to the terms of reference. In this regard, we have prepared our submission to cover the following topics: perspective on the business of medical schemes, forensic audits, violation of Section 59, and racial profiling. Perspective on the business of medical scheme. At the heart of the issue is the fight over money. And this money, it belongs to the patients. And unfortunately, the money does not actually go to the patients because 35% of that money goes to the administrators and 40% goes to the hospitals, which are partly owned by the same medical schemes or medical aids. And then 20% then goes to your specialists and allied workers and pharmacists. And then the last, which is 5%, goes to the GPs, who are actually at the heart of these mistreatments by the medical aids most of the time. And that's the simplest way of putting this issue. All the disputes that will be placed before the investigating panel are all in the final analysis reduced to a fight over financial interests. And previously, we heard Dr. Ngcukaitobi was talking about administrators owning more than 5% of what actually they're supposed to own. In this instance, they're owning 35%. And that's why they make huge profits, as you will further hear under my submission. We submit that the medical schemes have over the time developed a culture that is at odds with the notion of them being administrators who are a non-profit organization primarily offering health insurance products to their members. Upon a closer analysis to their general conduct, individual and collective, it becomes apparent that their underlying motive is maximizing profit. As any business, they are perfectly entitled to grow their revenues in all ways they consider viable. However, what has emerged in South Africa is most disturbing in that the medical schemes have resorted to unlawful and unethical way of maximizing these profits. One of the ways that they've aggressively pursued by the scheme is to this end is to reduce to a minimum the cash that leaves their business as payments to the healthcare providers, while receiving the maximum in the monthly premiums or subscription from their members. To illustrate this point, one only has to have a closer look at the number of Discovery Group, which is a Discovery medical scheme holding company. In an article published in the business report just last year on the 8th of November, titled Big Wig Take Home 336 million in bonuses, the group's remunerating committee chairperson, Sonia de Bruin Sebota, is quoted as saying 33% surge in bonus payment was due to target having been exceeded. The article further highlights that the total of 7 directors will share 15 million, while a pool of 1,134 managers will share a 265 million bounty, and 203 people will share the balance of the 85 million of the profit pool. The article also mentioned the chief executive of Discovery as being paid 12 million in bonus. To better understand the targets that have been exceeded, one only has to read the annual report to get the perspective of how a company in an economy with a growth rate of merely 2% for the past 5 years will be able to increase its bonus pool by 33%. To avoid digressing from the substance of this submission, I shall only refer to Discovery Financial Director's highlight in an annual report where the total established business, of which Discovery Health is the biggest portion delivery, combined 14% growth in opening profit, which is CPI above 5%. Discovery Health in particular reported 11% growth in operating profit and 13.9% growth in reserve, while only having had a 1.3% growth in membership. Discovery Health is listing key issues that impacted the business. List claims pressure management, the impact of medical inflation as the first issue, and the second issue identified as tough in this tough economic condition. The last paragraph of the commentary under the heading states the following: our fraud control efforts project recoveries for 2018 in excess of 500 million. In the case of Discovery Health Medical Scheme, Discovery Health achieved risk management savings of approximately 5.7 billion during 2017, representing 11.9% of potential risk claims, and return on investment to the scheme and its managed care risk of around 269%. The Afrocentric Group, which is a med scheme holding company, has also enjoyed similar prosperity. The audited annual results for the year end June 2018 highlights the following: 14% dividends increase, 118 increase in earnings per share, and this year we're talking about administrators to illustrate my point of this 35% that we're talking about. 46% gross profit before tax, 79% growth in profit after tax. In the commentary section under the title Developments, the following is stated: The identification and recovery fraud or improper claim through our fraud management software has been a great developmental success, with direct savings and recoveries of our clients in excess of 500 million. It is difficult to escape the conclusion that in these massive bonus pools also sit monies that were illegally withheld from medical practitioners through the process of forensic audits, non-payments, which are in themselves unlawful process. It is in pursuit of these super profits that medical practitioners have become easy pickings and defenseless cash cows for extortion by the medical scheme through fabricated allegation of fraud. These points are further supported by findings in the health market inquiry. The provisional findings and recommendation of 5 July 2018 were the following, and as stated. The health market inquiry concerns are highlighted by instances where it appears that schemes have abdicated their duties to administrators and have no control over important aspects of their business. For instance, a lot can be gleaned from the circumstances surrounding the Council for Medical Scheme investigating into PMB, which is prescribed minimum benefit compliance by the scheme, where it was found that certain medical schemes were paying PMB benefits out of the members' savings account in clear breach of the medical scheme fiduciary duty to look after their members' interests. This report further makes the following remarks. The delineation of medical scheme as non-profit organization and medical scheme administrators as for-profit organizations is unique to South Africa and tends to distort competition in the health care market. The health market inquiry has observed that there is no real competition through lower contribution premium and richer premiums and richer benefits between the 22 open medical schemes. Given the nature of the medical scheme being a non-profit for profit, there's a very little incentive for most medical schemes to grow because the trustees and the principal officers get paid regardless of the performance of the scheme. However, there's a small number of medical schemes who have a very close relationship with their for-profit administrators drive competition on their behalf. These administrators see the value in growing the medical scheme as they benefit from increased revenue from medical scheme. The observed dominance in the administrator market, coupled with non-regulation on profit margin, has meant that savings generated from this upstream competition, to the extent that it exists, has been taken out of healthcare and shared with shareholders rather than passed on to consumers, which in this case is your patients. For instance, the expected inverse relationship between administrators' cost and the number of beneficiaries does not hold in this market. And this point was also emphasized by Dr. Ngcukaitobi when he was talking about the pool. Because in the olden days, if you had a medical aid, they will give you maybe 20,000. That money belonged to the family. So if any member in the family was sick, we'll take from that money. But now the medical aids have found a way to say if you are 5, they will cut that 20,000 into small chunks, meaning they will allocate 1,500 maybe to the main member or 2,000, and then 1.5 to the child. Now when the child's so-called benefits are finished, that family cannot access the medical aid. It's exhausted for that child. They must start paying cash, even if the pool or the money or any member of the family still has money. And it was by design, because they want to recoup more money, because at the end of the year, when that money is not used, it goes back to the administrators. It doesn't go back to the patients. As part of the recommendation to the funders in the conclusion of this report, it says the following: to improve governance and align scheme interests with those of consumers, we propose, and this is a report, the Health Market Inquiry Report, which Judge Sandile Ngcobo was sitting on. It has been on for the past 5 years, and it has been dilly-dallied. I've asked in the many commissions why it's not released, and I'll be told lots of stories. I presented to the Human Rights Commission, and the medical aides themselves are the ones who actually came out and told us that it will be released in September. And I were worried why that should be the decision of the judge, not, it's like me knowing when you guys are gonna release the report or anybody else. That should be the work of your panel, not the information that I should know. And in the program that we had this year actually with SG and the minister, he had said that they blocked him many times when he wanted to release this report because it's not favorable to them. And we further asked them whether what they're doing in the market, is it dominance or is it monopoly? And one of the CEOs from Discovery refused to answer that question because of the same report that we're talking about now. But it's because they recommend the things that actually we're gonna discuss later on. As part of the recommendations to funders in conclusion of this report, it says the following: to improve governance and align schemes' interests with those of consumers, we propose that the remuneration packages of employees of schemes, particularly that of the trustees and principal officers, be linked to more explicit to the performance of the scheme. Performance will be measured in terms of the value delivered to members, not to administrators. Presently, the remunerations of principal officers and trustees is poorly connected to their performance. So patients are left in the lurch. They go to consult. Every time you go and see a healthcare practitioner, you are bound to be followed by a bill. The medical aid does not these days pay full bills, and I'm a witness to that as well. We propose that the remuneration of principal officers and trustees be set at a minimum base level, and that the rest of their package be linked to clearly defined quantitative objectives of the scheme, such as reductions in non-healthcare costs or administrative costs, because this is a bone of contention. This is where the money goes. It goes to non-medical. So all the premiums that is collected, majority of it, it doesn't go to the payments of the healthcare practitioners. It does not service the member or the patient. The second topic is forensic audits and violation of Section 59. Sorry for that. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Okay. We have overwhelming evidence from our members, as we will submit to the investigation panel as a supplementary bundle to this submission, of how the medical scheme have been unlawful in taking monies due to medical practitioners exploiting fraud, waste, and abuse allegation. These fraud allegations have created what we deem a crisis and a ticking bomb in the medical practice through the exploitation of a supposed lacuna in section 59, because I think this section is the one that actually is opening the loophole for the medical aids to do whatever they want to do. While the Council for Medical Scheme refuses to intervene or act decisively in resolving the issues, the Council for Medical Scheme will be shown later to use the said lacuna to defend or condone the unlawful actions of these medical schemes. As stated in the annual reports, the two schemes cited above have between them collected 1 billion just from this process alone in 2018. Hence, it is abundantly clear that what has caused the recent upsurge in forensic audit activity and its underlying objectives. For purpose of this submission, we will use the experience of Dr. Singh, a dermatologist from Durban with 28 years in medical practice. Dr. Singh's case is, in our view, a classic case of the unlawful conduct of the medical scheme as experienced by the majority of our members. Dr. Singh has made a submission in his personal capacity as well to the very same facts. In 2019, on the 19th June 2017, Dr. Singh received 2 letters from MedScheme and Bonitas, both with subject verification of service. These letters were in essence cut and paste version of each other, with the only difference being the listed patient's name. They were both from one Devin Fleming, a forensic analyst from MedScheme. Dr. Singh obliged to the request and sent the information that has been requested from him via a courier. On 7 August 17, he again received 2 letters from MedScheme and Bonitas, both with subject payments to your practice. Again, these letters were in substance a cut and paste of each other, making the very same allegation in the very same wording. The only difference again being in the list of patients and the amounts being claimed, which was around 211,500 and something for MedScheme, and 241,800 for Bonitas as an erroneous billing. I think this issue, you dissected it earlier on about this coding, because majority of these things, it emanates from this coding which is not coordinated. So you are found guilty and to be told that you are fraudulent due to coding. So that's why it was very important that that issue was discussed thoroughly, because majority of the so-called fraud, it comes from coding. Because if you use a wrong coding for a certain or wrong medical aid, it's wrong. So there's no uniformity, like as it used to be in the olden days. Then on the 3rd of October 2017, Dr. Singh responded to MedScheme letters objecting to the alleged discrepancies, going as far as informing MedScheme that the Dermatology Society had informed him that the codes he was using were correct and that money claim against him were illegal. It's exactly the point that Dr. Ngcukaitobi was emphasizing, that here, these are medical issues, the coding. It's the healthcare practitioners who knows the codes and who creates the codes. Then medicalists jumps into a bandwagon and misuse them. On 29 November 2017, Dr. Singh received a letter from MedScheme by one Devin Fleming informing him that direct payment to his practice will be terminated as from 8 December 2017. Now, you see, like we're explaining again, if you are relying on the medical aids for your survival, to run your practice, to pay rent, to pay your workers, it's damaging if then they stop your payment. And I don't know which section of the law they're using to stop those payments. On the 29 November 2017, Dr. Singh received another letter from MedScheme by one Renard Nell with subject blacklisting. They even blacklist you. Long even before you have a trial or anything, like everything is just done on the desktop in the office somewhere in your absence. Mr. Singh informing him that his practice has been placed on hold. Dr. Singh had already, on 27 June 2017, written a detailed complaint to a council for medical scheme about the conduct of med scheme with the reference number CMS 65173. Dr. Singh also wrote 2 letters to the CEO of med scheme on 10 July 2017, where he expressed frustration with how he was being treated by med scheme. The second letter was not responded to. On 24 April 2018, Dr. Singh addressed an email to Mr. Sipho Makabane, the senior strategist at the Council for Medical Scheme, wherein he expressed frustration at the dispute between himself and the med scheme not being resolved within a stipulated 120 days for the dispute to be resolved, and how the person, Mamsima Shilo, assigned to resolve the case, had informed him that she did not know what to do about this case. On 29 June 2018, the Council for Medical Scheme gave a written ruling by the register where the findings summarily were: the decision by med scheme to suspend payment was found to be in compliance with section 57.4C and 57.6A of the Medical Scheme Act. The dispute regarding incorrect use of tariff codes and clinical codes discrimination falls within the scope of the Health Profession Council of South Africa. The register could not compel the respondents to release payments of claims whose validity was in dispute. Dr. Singh appealed his ruling, which was upheld on 19 June 2019, just last month. Dr. Singh's case effectively demonstrates the general modus operandi of this big medical scheme in recent years, how they've effectively become prosecutors, judges in their own cases. That is the one aspect of improper due process in the use of Section 59 that needs to be looked at, in terms of how the balance of power favors the scheme in instances where disputes arises. The bulk of the submission by our members are effectively individual accounts of such experiences with obviously practice-specific dynamics. There are submissions by medical technologists with laboratories who also, who as part of the forensic audit are compelled to provide confidential patient's information without patient's consent. Ethically, they cannot divulge such information to any person not in the medical profession, not involved in the clinical processes of treating the patient. Their refusal to do so on those grounds is the basis to withhold their payments and to have them blacklisted as well. As can be seen in the 2 verification of service letter received by Dr. Singh, he was asked to produce complete member and dependent files. The request for files that contain conventional clinical treatment information is not only unethical, but is actually a violation of Section 14.1 and 14.2 of the National Health Act 61 of 2003. The subsequent process and practice of coercing medical practice to sign acknowledgement of debt agreement admitting of fraud allegation not legally proven is actually fraudulent on the part of the medical schemes. I'll pause there and give the advocate to delve into the Section 59.
Where is Dr. Singh right now?
He was supposed to be here today, but he's part of our member.
I see.
Yes, but he submitted, he would be part of the people who will be submitting under your cross-examination if you require. We can bring him.
And I know the reason why you're using his specific case, but that's all by permission and consent that
Yeah.
you can present his case as an
Correct.
example.
100%.
Thank you, Chair. The substance of my submission in this regard is here. The essence of my submission goes to this point. Number one, the use of Section 59.3 is wrong for the purposes that it's used for. There's actually another set of provisions that they should be relying upon to execute what it is that they want to do. Number two, we dispute that the interpretation of Section 59.3 is actually correct in terms of the quantification of losses as contemplated in the Act. And I will take you through our arguments in that regard. Now,
Sorry, Mr. Buthelezi, you're talking about the interpretation by the council.
by everybody applying it, everybody who's relying on this section is actually misapplying the section itself. And I will start you at this point. Section 59.3 speaks of an amount that has been paid bona fide. However, through the forensic audit process, which is done through desktop audits, etc., they then don't arrive at an amount. They arrive at an average. And for the purposes of auditing, audits and surveys are not the same thing. We cannot say you're doing a forensic audit and then you arrive at a mean or an average mean of what the number is. We'll get to the point where the Act says, find an amount, and this amount has got to be correctly calculated. That's the starting point. So, and Section 59.3 does not make provision for aggregation of such amounts. Now, we've got a sample of a mid-scheme survey or forensic audit and how it's done. And they don't go list claims 1 to 50 and say these claims were incorrect.
Where is that sample?
I'll get to it, Chair. It's at the back. It's not appearing clearly, our pagination. It starts with, I'll tell you now. It's NHCPA
It's
16
the one
and
dated the 4th of December 2017.
Indeed so, Chair.
Yeah.
All right. So,
I want to talk you through the mechanism and the methodology used here.
so the point here is that they don't decide an amount, they average.
Indeed so, Chair.
Okay.
And that is their submission even in Mr. Singh's appeal, that they don't go forensically line by line item.
So can you just refer me where in the bundle that is? Can you give me, I know it's not paginated.
Yes. Well, the point is
Does it have an annexure number?
There's Med-Scheme's head of arguments in the Mr. Singh's appeal, where they actually detail the process that they use. And it's a system of algorithms, it's a statistical integration system that they use. And it's not forensic to the extent that they call it forensic. Because if they say 20% of your claims were outside your average, and that's the number.
Yeah, I mean, it's PA 13/8 or something.
Yeah.
And the paragraph number in those heads of argument?
I beg your pardon?
What is the paragraph number in those heads of argument?
In those heads of arguments, it's, you're now getting ahead of my argument, Chair, because I want, if you'd allow me the space to just build it up, because I do get to those points where I quote specifics from those heads of argument. Thank you. Now, what we submit is the following.
So I suppose this page 9, 10. That's where they explain the methodology.
Yeah.
Yes, Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Anyway, sorry.
Thank you. Now, we say the application of Section 59, as it has been done in in Dr. Singh's case, is an outright misapplication of the law itself. And it's erroneous to use Section 59 when Regulation 6 is actually the provision that is actually dealing about erroneous billing. Now, the forensic audit process, as we will then get to the point, which was what triggered this process in its entirety, is also got a racial bias in terms of where the dominance of these forensic audits are taking place, but we'll get to those numbers. But what we request that we believe is information that could prove this allegation in this regard is the following. One, each of the schemes could submit to this commission a list of practices where forensic audits have been carried out since 2017 for each medical scheme. Two, a complete list of practitioners who've been placed on non-payment since 2017. And a complete list of practitioners who've signed admission of debt agreements for each of the schemes. And if what we say is not true, then the following should hold. The number has to correlate. If 30%, as a thumbs up figure, of doctors, it's got the demographic of the split has got to correlate with what the demographic is. But we've got another graph in the end, which comes from the Health Professionals Council, which has got a very, very inverted number, which supports this point. And number two, and that's why we say, we ask that this council also analyze the fraud statistics as reported to the Health Professionals Council of South Africa and see the disparities there in terms of the patterns of fraud reported and what the numbers look like. And it is the submission of my organization, the organization that I represent here, that we are not opposed to forensic audits taking place. In fact, we encourage them to clean out the bad apples out of the system and eliminate fraud and eliminate waste and all sorts of misconduct. So we are not opposed to the process of forensic audits. What we say is the forensic audit process must be transparent, just, and lawful. And in establishing that, we also request the panel does the following. If you could have a view and request the employment contracts of the forensic auditors, as well as the incentive schemes and bonuses tied to these contracts, as was submitted by Dr. Kumeta earlier, we believe that these forensic audits are conducted in an unlawful way. They breach constitutional values, and a lot of them border on are criminal, and we'll get to the criminal aspects of it. And all they are done for, as now the numbers of the profits and the earnings of these organizations now reflect, they are not done to eliminate fraud, waste, and abuse. But they are inherently designed to recover monies using this process of billing inaccuracies. Now, and this abuse of power is most arbitrary and is
Mr.
based.
I don't know if you know whether or not the med scheme has amended its process after it was found by the appeal panel. I think it was Coffee SC, who found that it was unlawful to follow the process they were following because it was not in accordance with a fair process, at paragraph 36 of his ruling. They set it out in their own heads of argument, but that process was found to be procedurally unfair.
Well, Chair, I
They
don't know.
amended it.
I don't know how long that ruling dates back to.
No, the ruling is June 2019. I mean, if I went to their process now, would I find it differently to what they did then, or will it be the same?
Well, Chair, I cannot confirm that, but what we are discussing and what has brought us here is the process until now. What the process has been all along. And if it's been recently found to be to be unlawful, then it supports our submission all along that we've been saying that what they're doing is unlawful. Well, talking to that process, Chair, then I won't exhaust the point any further if the process has been found to be unlawful. But our submissions in that regard is that the process itself is arbitrary and is based on flawed methodologies that yield flawed outcomes. And what those are is a desktop audit done with a computer algorithm and it then does a set of permutations that nobody knows what they are and comes out at a figure. And that we cannot say amounts to a process. That process is one, not a recognized accounting process of doing audits. Two, it's not a process that has been endorsed by the Health Professionals Council of South Africa or any other regulatory body to say, you may conduct audits in this way. And everybody then signs up to a process that says, this is the method which is recognized in the industry as a legitimate way of conducting audits. Now, in addition to the problem with the methodology, as was applied to Dr. Singh, is this point. They say you were billing outside your peers or the range of your peers. And the question we pose is, who are Dr. Singh's peers? Dr. Singh has 28 years experience as a dermatologist and has 3 practices. The universe of who the peers that you get benchmarked against is not defined. And it cannot be right in law or in any other proper way of calculating things to then say you shall be benchmarked against all dermatologists the country over. That is inaccurate. And the same way in which they've got arbitrary ways of determining these fees that doctors get paid. To say we've negotiated a rate for doctors X amount, 200 Rand a consultation. That fails to take into account the economics of certain things. One, not all doctors are the same experience. We can't have a doctor of 2 years experience charging the same rate as the doctor of 40 years experience or 30 years experience. It's prejudicial to the doctor with more experience. 2, doctors, by virtue of how the country is designed, don't operate in the same localities. If one doctor chooses to service the upmarket addresses of Johannesburg and another person chooses to service a rural community somewhere else, their operating costs as a business are different. And if the Sandton patient decides, I want to go to this doctor who's popular for treating all sorts of conditions, and that doctor is entitled to charge a premium, that is also reflective of the fact that he's paying a much higher rate per square meter for running his operation. Now, practices are open for a fixed number of hours in a day. And if he's meant to make a decent profit or a decent margin in his operation, and he's confined to seeing 4 patients an hour for 10 hours within the day, how is he then to be set at the same flat rate as somebody operating somewhere where the rate is a fraction or 10% of what this one is paying as a rental fee? That's just a basic calculation, which I think is flawed in the method of imposing rates on these doctors. Now, the second part then is, if you looked at Dr. Singh's case, is that this analyst then ventures on to start making pronouncements of a clinical nature, and you say, no, you doctor are not supposed to treat this condition. He's not qualified to make that opinion on the doctor. He does his own assessment and then determines that it's inappropriate for Dr. Singh to have been able to remove certain lesions from the skin in such a space of time. He's not qualified. And then what subsequently happens, he then draws his conclusion on his own from his own desktop. He's never been to the practice. He's never interviewed Dr. Singh. All he asked for is a set of documents, and then he decides, no, you're committing fraud. And thereof, one person makes that one conclusion. And without understanding this person's practice and what the dynamics in that community are, says you've used this code excessively versus your peers in the area, therefore the excessive use of this code amounts to fraud on your part, and that we say is improper. Now, in challenging this use of Section 59.3, Section 59.3 allows medical schemes to claw back amounts by way of deduction in circumstances that are theft, fraud, negligence, and misconduct. And in our challenging this thing, we start at this point of losses. It says, where the scheme incurs losses caused by either theft, fraud, negligence, or misconduct. What we challenge is the following. If a doctor claims fraudulently against a patient, and the scheme is able to prove that this claim was fraudulent, whose loss is it? Is it a loss for the patient or is it a loss for the scheme? Because taking a claim that was done by Dr. Kumete against patient Buthelezi to say, he's overcharged me by 100 Rand. The recovery of the 100 Rand that happens, who does it go to? Rightfully speaking, it should come back to the patient. But that is not happening here. And by way of analogy, I'll use this one. If anybody here has a fraudulent bank transaction carried out against their own bank account, what do the banks do? The banks recover that money however way that they recover that money, and they credit the customer. It doesn't then go to the pool of funds that the bank has to fight fraud in its general practice. And this is exactly the problem that is happening here. These losses are not the losses of the scheme. They are the losses of the patient. And there is no subsequent process, if monies are recovered, to repatriate these monies back to the patient. The patient stays at a loss. If Dr. Kumete has overcharged a patient by 1,000 Rand, that patient is never credited with that 1,000 Rand, even if that money is recovered 2 years later.
Mr. Buthelezi, I'm sorry, I'm not following the submission. If the patient didn't pay for the particular service,
Yes.
how has the patient experienced a loss?
It gets deducted out of their own medical savings, Commissioner, in this way. It starts at this point, and this Chaba judgment does this point. If a patient arrives at a doctor, the first process that happens is they say, they get authorization to see, do you have enough funds for this practitioner to service you? And post your servicing, an invoice is generated, and that invoice is docked against what you have as an allocation of funds for the year. And if subsequently that money is then recovered by the scheme from either fraud or whatever process that the doctor may have overcharged you by, you then don't get credited back for that consultation that overcharged you. And that we submit is problematic. And that's why we say the schemes then cannot misappropriate losses that are for them, that actually are incurred by the patient, and come back through Section 59.3 and claim those losses as their own. And how they do that is by failing to reimburse those patients where fraudulent claims have happened, because they then recover the money for the scheme. And we'll get to the points about prescribed minimum benefits and the risk pool and staying above 25% solvency rate. We'll get to that point. Now, where this point is confirmed, and I will not read the judgments in detail, and I'll just get to the two key points, is the Chaba Medical Solutions and others versus Siketi and others, which is an SCA judgment of 2016. And it establishes the point of what the relationship is between the medical practitioners and the scheme or the administrator. And just to assist you, I'll just get to paragraph, because I think there's no need to read the judgment verbatim, but there's 2 points in the...
Can you just tell me, I just want to go back to this question of procedural fairness.
Yes.
In the way in which, because I think the bulk of the complaints that your clients have are about the fact that there is an arbitrary process that is followed by schemes. The document you handed up usefully, the heads of argument of med scheme, they explain the process from page 6, from paragraphs 20. Now, this is the clawback process under 59.3, as opposed to the settlement of the claim under 59.2, read with Regulation 5. So this is what they do. Claiming patterns and trends are analyzed retrospectively. So they look at a sample, presumably, not each and every claim you've ever submitted, by the administrator or the scheme for irregularities or anomalies. Then it says this is done using exception reporting, actuarial and financial analysis, predictive analytical software, and other controls. Reliance is also placed on member referrals or whistleblower tip-offs to investigate specific healthcare providers or associated claims that are questionable despite having been paid. The number of highest billed claims which fall outside the norm provide a good example of a potential irregularity to analyze. So this is presumably what they call an outlier. When a claim is submitted, the second respondent's claims administration system honors each claim individually based on the above claims payment process. However, at the end of each month or financial quarter, the scheme or administrator conducts an analysis of claims received and paid. This is where billing irregularities or anomalies, such as claiming for more expensive medicines by normal certain healthcare providers, which is physically impossible, are detected. Now, here is the point I want your comment on. In view of the number of beneficiaries that second respondents administers, now this is med scheme telling you that we've got large volumes and claims received per day, as well as the prescribed time period within which healthcare providers must be paid, it is impossible to detect such irregularities or anomalies at the time of receipt and payment of the claim. So they're making 2 points, my understanding. The one is that we have to honor the claim in 30 days' time. So you submit a claim, we pay it in good faith. After that, we do this issue of putting things into a system which then produces anomalies, and based on those anomalies, we can then claw back. Now, what is another realistic procedure that can be followed by the schemes that would be fair to your clients? Especially a large scheme like, well, I mean, med scheme is an administrator, but a large administrator like med scheme, which has thousands and thousands of these claims.
Chair, it's a lame excuse.
Yeah.
Absolutely lame. Absolutely ridiculously lame excuse to come rely on that provision to say the volume of claims that come through their systems. The starting point is the authorization process. Nothing happens without them authorizing this claim to happen. What should happen, which is a failure on their part, and
So can you explain what you mean by authorization?
well, the starting point is that when you show up at a medical practice, you present your medical aid details, and they get authorization from the scheme for you to get the treatment that you've come to ask for. So already the medical scheme is aware that you are at practice so-and-so's, Dr. so-and-so's practice, and they seek authorization. In other words, in seeking authorization, one is to get clearance to say, do you have funds? And that's why we have this notion of people who say, my medical aid is maxed out. You've got no longer funds. You can no longer then claim thereafter if your benefits are maxed out for the year or for whatever period that it's allocated to. So they've got a process, one, of pre-clearing.
Sorry, before you continue, and that authorization process, you say takes place no matter what the health condition is or the treatment that's required.
Indeed.
So it's
No
not only for
hospital-
hospitalization or anything, it's for even
Regardless.
in rooms,
Regardless.
for consultation?
Same procedure, Chair. Sorry, Commissioner. What happens is here, if a patient or a person gets knocked over on the side of the road, and an ambulance picks them up and rushes them to the hospital. What the hospital will verify is the first thing is this patient is covered under medical aid. And if they're not, they will do the minimum just to keep that person alive and then dispatch them to a public facility where this requirement is not there. So nothing moves forward without the starting point of establishing whether are you going to be paid for by a medical scheme.
But at that point,
Yes.
the scheme is not aware of what treatment is going to be administered.
Then
I mean,
they
if you're
must-
going in for a consultation,
Yes.
and there's an authorization process at that point,
Yes.
then isn't the scheme establishing what you've just said, which is, are there enough funds for you to
Indeed
be
so.
consulting?
Indeed so.
Then an account is submitted.
Indeed.
And then at that point, it depends on what is included in the account, which is a separate exercise, isn't that?
Yes. Well, the law provides for them to fix that. Regulation 6.2. And I'll ask to read Regulation 6 to address this point, which is (6.2) says, if a medical scheme is of the opinion that an account, statement, or claim is erroneous or unacceptable for payment, it must inform both the member and the relevant healthcare provider within 30 days after receipt of such an account, statement, or claim that is erroneous or unacceptable for payment, and state reasons for such an opinion. 3. After the member and the relevant healthcare provider have been informed, as referred to in sub-regulation 2, such member and provider must be afforded an opportunity to correct and resubmit such an account or statement within the period of 60 days following date from which it was returned for correction. That's Regulation 6.2. 6.4. If a medical scheme fails to notify the member and the relevant healthcare provider within 30 days that an account, statement, or claim is erroneous or unacceptable for payment in terms of sub-regulation 2, or fails to provide an opportunity for correction for resubmission in terms of sub-regulation 3, the medical scheme shall bear the onus of proving that such an account, statement, or claim is in fact erroneous or unacceptable for payment in the event of a dispute.
Dr. Buthelezi, I'm still, sorry, Mr. Buthelezi, I'm still struggling with whether or not a scheme or administrator knows in advance that a service has been rendered, which my colleague has asked the question about. But I just wanted to ask you, where a scheme is faced with an actual fraudulent claim, and
Yes.
let's say the fraudulent claim is that in fact the service hasn't been provided at all,
Yes.
how then can they know what's being provided if nothing was provided?
Well, the point is, we don't, let me deal with your first point and then I'll get to your second point. The medical scheme, if a patient goes to a doctor for a diagnosis, they don't know what's wrong. And the doctor is at liberty then to diagnose whatever the doctor and can charge whatever. So we're not saying that the medical scheme may have systems to know in advance what the diagnosis may be or what the treatment may be. All that we're saying is that they've got a pre-clearing system to say, we give you the go-ahead to go consult Dr. X. That's the starting point. Now, to get to the second question. Sorry, I lost my trail of thought. Could you please rephrase that question for me, sir?
Yes, so I'm struggling with an instance where there is an
Yes.
actual case of fraud,
Yes.
and the claim
Now,
is not
no,
even
if there is an actual
no
case of fraud,
service.
This
But
is what
a
section,
particular type of fraud.
this is what section regulation 6.2 does.
Can I have?
Well, I mean, there is no account to be resubmitted because no service was rendered.
Well,
The entire
that's the
thing is
point.
bogus.
Well,
That is the version of the
then
scheme.
we go to section 66 of this legislation, of the medical, section 66, which says the following. Section 66 of the Medical Schemes Act talks to offences and penalties. And there's a process set down there. Starts at the point of saying, and I'll start with section 66, 1B. It says, any person who makes or causes to be made a claim for payment of any benefits allegedly due in terms of the rules of a medical scheme, knowing such to be false, commits an offense. The offense you ask about, Chair, is addressed in section 66, 1B.
No, but that's a criminal offense. I mean, I'm just talking now about the process between the scheme and the service provider.
Well, the scheme needs to devise better forensic auditing systems.
Yeah,
in other words, if they need to devise, and this is where the failure has been on the part of the regulator in particular, to set guidelines to safeguard the interests of the schemes and to make sure that there's no laissez-faire and free for all in terms of what we submitted initially was a regulated audit and forensic process which everybody buys into and is bound by. So if erroneous areas of fraudulent, we don't deny that fraud happens, Chair. We don't deny that.
There's something to the point that you made earlier, which is that the system of aggregation is itself unlawful because it's not provided for anywhere in the Act.
Indeed,
The
so.
Act works on the basis of a single account.
Correct.
That's what it is. And so I'm saying if they go back,
But can you take that further? Because that, I agree that that is a compelling point.
Yes.
The section 59.3 talks about an
amount.
An amount.
yes. And what we challenge is how this amount is arrived at.
Okay, so if the schemes, which is what MedScheme argues in their heads of argument in that internal appeal, that the volume makes it impossible for them to be able to do what you're suggesting they do, which is very quickly pick up the error and say this was the amount and this was the invoice and this is what we want payment for. They have to do this retrospective analysis, right?
Yes.
Okay, and then at that point, they say, we've picked up these errors. And it's at that point when they aggregate. Is that what you are saying?
Yes. And that we say we've got two problems with that. One,
So, yeah, so just explain that to me from the way you understand it. Sorry,
Well-
I'm interrupting you, because they aggregate. What do? They go back, they look at your profile.
Well,
They determine you're an outlier. They say, what, we find that you have billed irregularly on this occasion or on 10 occasions, or explain that to me, what happens at that
let
point.
me tell you what happens there. And we're going to submit the vast evidence from our members, which says we've picked up in a 1-month sample that 20% of your bills were incorrect. We've got 20% errors. Therefore, 20% of your bills for the last 2 years are then incorrect,
5 years.
or however long they choose to go back. And that we say is problematic. It cannot be. To audit people, to say it's a forensic audit and in a non-forensic way, it's not a survey. If, Chair, to get to your point of solutions, then the solution for them is here. They need to get agreement with the Health Professionals Council of South Africa to say, due to the large volume of claims that we have to do, we have to then all accept that deviations and averages that are outside what is should be then accepted as irregular. And there's an upfront acceptance of this model and method of doing things that everybody then can buy into, then nobody can object. But such process wasn't there. And two, the legislation hasn't said you may use an average of your calculation to determine that a fraudulent amount, the fraud equals to the average of what you've calculated. That is not provided for.
Nor could you agree to it just because you might buy into it. Doesn't make it lawful.
Well, it does not. And I'm saying as a compromise, perhaps, to address the point the chair raises about there being a voluminous amount of claims and unable for them to process them fast enough, then there'll have to be an acceptance overall. It's like how the electricity is billed, that you get an average reading for the past 3 months, and then at some point, they'll reconcile the account to get you to a specific amount, and either or up or down, then they'll recalibrate to get you to the specific amount that you actually do correctly owe them. That's how electricity is billed, because they've got to bill all houses simultaneously every day and produce accounts for everybody at the same time. So there is a system where they tell you what we are telling you now is your average reading. And every now and again, they'll come back and say, we now have an actual reading. And based on what we've billed you as an average and what we've billed you as an actual reading, we reconcile the two and we tell you how much you owe us.
But isn't there another step that the scheme, the administrator takes, which is you get that letter saying we picked you up as an outlier in these 2 respects.
Yes.
The amount involved is 200,000, but you still have an opportunity to provide the information and the records they request to show that they are wrong.
Yes.
So it's not an automatic penalty, is it?
Well, if you analyze the evidence that our members submit, we'll give you one example.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose part of the problem is what they say at paragraph 25 of their heads of argument. It says the healthcare provider concerned is engaged with a view of providing him with an opportunity to make representations with regards to the scheme's findings. And then they say payments to the healthcare provider are withheld until the matter is finalized. I mean, that's why
We get to that point.
complaining.
Well, the point is here, Chair. That's where the wrongfulness, because we've got one analyst sitting on his own. And in this very same heads of argument, he gives this point. He says, whether I deem this answer to be acceptable or not, then do I decide whether to cut you off and withhold your payment. Now, we've got a case of one Dr. Naidu, who's an audiologist, happens to be one of our leadership. He relocated from Johannesburg, from KZN to start operating in Johannesburg. And suddenly they say, why are you billing from Johannesburg? He said, but I've informed you that my practice has changed sites. He says, well, you're committing fraud. And that's the end of it. And now he owed R1 million. On that arbitrary decision on its own. And now he's on the blacklisted list, in the blacklisted list going around. It's the arbitrariness, because they sit and say, provide us with proof of your qualifications. Provide us with help with your patient files. The med scheme letter says, give us your patient files, not for the past month or for the time that you claimed. From the start, when you started seeing this patient, you miss one page of the patient files where there's a consultation dating back. You are committing fraud.
Aren't you required to keep records of a certain number of years?
For who? They're not for the medical scheme to introspect. They are confined to where the matters pertain to them.
Okay, so is the argument that the information, that they shouldn't even be asking for the information
Indeed.
because it's confidential?
Indeed.
And so that doesn't, you're saying that doesn't save them from what they do?
No, it doesn't.
So their argument that if you just provided the information they requested, everything becomes resolved and life can go forward.
Indeed, because if you look at verification of services, letter that was received by Dr. Singh, the list of things that Dr. Singh is asked for, proof of his equipment, proof of a whole lot of things that have nothing to do with an erroneous bill. None of the things that they ask him for has to do with an erroneous bill. It's a process designed to disqualify Singh from payment on other technical grounds that have got nothing to do with erroneous billing.
And I see that they use the term blacklist med scheme.
Indeed, it's there.
So we tried to probe this yesterday with the funders, the difference between indirect payment, or what is suspended. What does it mean to say you are suspended?
Well, it means...
Does it mean that you're not going to be paid directly, but the patient will get paid and will be reimbursed? Is that what it means? Or does it mean that they advise even the members not to come to you?
I wouldn't say they advise the members not to come to you.
They do.
If you read the GEMS letter,
Dr. Ngcukaitobi, you are allowed to answer if you feel like answering.
Yes, yeah.
So,
Council, yeah,
just
because,
don't feel like you are constrained.
Let me give you the Council, Commissioner, the medical aids are just playing ping pong, like Dr. Tlape said. The truth of the matter it is that they blacklist practitioners and are using financial means to actually leverage on practitioners. So what they will do is they will withhold your money, aggregate it maybe to 1 million or $500,000. I'm just giving an example. Have it in their coffers and say to you, okay, we have identified claims. Mind you, the claims that they're talking about, it's not the current claims that are holding the money about. They're talking about the old claims. Saying to you, we'll pay you your money if you pay us the previous money. So it's not about the current money that actually it would be in dispute. And again, let me bring some facts into this.
That's because in their argument, they don't want to throw good money after bad. If they've taken a view that there was erroneous billing and they need to recover the money, they've said they're not going to continue paying until that issue of whether that issue of the irregular billing is resolved.
Okay, just maybe to go back a little bit, and you'll hear it also tomorrow from one of my colleagues. You see, they hold the money, they check, and they realize that there were no erroneous claims because they checked and there was nothing. They've withheld your money, it doesn't come back with interest, you owe your landlord, you didn't pay your workers, and whose problem it is. And they were wrong. And many times they've been proven to be wrong. And like we are always saying, the fact that Section 59 provided 30 days, I don't think it was by mistake that it must be identified within that specific time period to correct those claims. It's because you can't just perpetually be in a limbo. There has to be a period of time when things are addressed. I mean, even legally, you guys, the cases do prescribe, or claims do prescribe. So we can't perpetually be on a limbo to say, okay, one day I might wake up and then I'm caught up. I must know that for the past 5 years or 3 years, I have a clean bill of claims or whatnot. And the issue of saying that the claim volume is too much, I don't think is true. Because maybe let me bring something to your attention. Remember, the administrators, they are not medical schemes. I don't know if you are aware. Administrators are not medical schemes. They are companies that are supposed to be separate from medical schemes. And meaning there can be as many as they can be. Metropolitan, there can be med scheme, there can be. It's just that unique situation with Discovery whereby they administer themselves, which I don't know how did it happen. Because they were trying to separate this collusion. Because if you check in the health inquiry market, there's this huge collusion whereby the administrators and the medical aids and the hospitals and the pharmaceuticals, they're in one pot. And that's what is creating the problem. And majority of time, like I've just said in my previous point, they have instances where they've flagged practices and people submitted invoices, yet they didn't pay them. And a point that I argued further previously is that why then do you say, if I defrauded you 2 million, you say to me, Dr. Gumede, if you pay me 200,000, you are not a fraudster. Let's continue doing business together. To me, that's problematic. Because if I'm a fraudster, why do you want me to? Why do you want us to go back? Because this acknowledgement of debts, the reason why you don't have proper statistics earlier on with HPSA, and they use HPSA to threaten us. You get there to the office, they say to you, if you pay us, we don't report you to the council. It was NHCPA, us, who went there to Discover to say to them, that can't be right. That all the guys who sign acknowledgement of debts are not fraudsters. Hence, in our submission, we are asking that you find the number of people who are paying them. And you'll see that there's too much discrepancy in that. Huge. If you pay them, you are a good boy. So, I mean, if you are combating fraud, let's be honest, you can't be encouraging people to be continuing and doing fraud. You should be able to say, okay, this is fraud. Because they know that in truth, it's erroneous billing most of the time, which are the codes that we spoke about. So it's about money-making scheme. It's not about combating any criminality and whatnot. So we must be cognizant of the fact that they are abusing Section 59 to recover monies. And we further submitted that according to the combating crime and whatever, when the amount is above 100,000, they must report it to the relevant authorities. Do they do that? They don't. And then it's an offense on their side. And they've claimed millions from people, from practitioners. So we can't say that whatever they're doing is combating crime or stopping abuse. It's not. Actually, to me, as far as I'm concerned, it's just encouraging people to commit more crime rather than stopping it.
If I may continue, Chair.
Yes. At some point, we need to get to Dr. Mkize.
Yes.
If she is still going to speak.
No, she's still coming, Chair.
All right.
All right. You see, linked to the point that Dr. Kumeta makes, we then have to read Section 66(2) of the Act, which says the following. In other words, it places a limitation and qualifies the contraventions of the Act to the extent in which they may be acted upon. It says, no contravention or failure to comply with provisions of this Act shall be punishable under subsection 1 if the act or omission constituting that contravention or failure to comply with any request or requirement is punishable as an offence under provisions of any other Act of Parliament which controls the professional conduct of any healthcare provision. Now, there's another legislation which deals with this fraudulent behavior, which is Section 34 of the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act, Section 34(1), which says, any person who holds a position of authority and who knows or ought to reasonably have known or suspected that any person has committed an offense under the first schedule, I'll skip 1, 2, the offense of theft, fraud, extortion, forgery, uttering a forged document involving an amount of 100,000 rand or more, must report such knowledge or suspicion or cause such knowledge or suspicion to be reported to the police official. Now, each have claimed recovering fraud in the tune of 500 million minimum. 500 million for mid scheme, 500 million for discovery, just the two. And none of that is reported to the authorities. Because the legislation is there for them to deal with these fraudulent issues, and they should be pursuing this legislation which can serve as a deterrent for the behavior to stop. If people are committing fraud, we should be having multiple cases of doctors appearing in courts for fraudulent claims so that the practice dies and those who carry on with it suffer the legal consequences thereof. And not to be brought to say, sign an acknowledgement of debt that you owe us because you acted fraudulently, and we shake hands and we carry on doing business with you. That is wrong. And it's the second point that Dr. Kumeta makes about the fact that these billing errors, which are supposed to be regulated by Regulation 6(2) and Regulation 6 in its entirety, are then used to tarnish everybody as conducting themselves fraudulently, when in actual fact it's not. If you prove a billing error, the section provides fix the billing error, however long back you need to go, fix the billing error. If you pick up fraud, report it to the police, report it to the Health Professionals Council of South Africa. You've got no business getting into negotiations to recover your money. You can launch civil action to recover that money. The problem this happens is that this misapplication of 59(3), our interpretation of it is the following. if a doctor, through whatever means, causes loss to the scheme itself, in whichever way, that causes the scheme to lose monies. In other words, there's various ways in which the scheme can be financially impacted through, then they can invoke Section 59(3). If the scheme can prove direct losses to the scheme itself and not patients. And if they can prove then, subsequently, that the billing errors or the fraud amounts to losses to the scheme itself, then recover those specific amounts that you can determine through a proper process. Let's not have a survey of fraud and then decide there's a 29% unemployment rate in South Africa, 29% fraud is also going to be coded. Then you start creating linear integration, relations and correlations, which legally you cannot do. You've got to be particular, you've got to be specific. You owe us 602 Rand. We want to recoup our 602 Rand as it relates to invoice XYZ that's for the service you did not commit that you claimed you committed on 31 July 2019. It should go to that detail. And they've got the resources and the means to do so, even if they have to do it retrospectively. For the kind of money that they recover, Discovery says they charge or they recoup in premiums per month 6.2 billion. There are businesses making far less money in far more complex businesses that can get the accuracy right on that point. Because it's not like it's retail stores of people flowing through the till points throughout the day. If it means then the systems must be changed to be like a banking system or to be like a retail system, to make sure that the doctors must have till points that talk to a certain system somewhere. The innovation and the technology is there, so they can do that. And then we've dealt with this point.
Has Dr. Singh's case been resolved? So is the appeal, or was there a review of that
Yes, we've got a ruling.
decision?
The ruling is attached.
And there's no further...
No. Well, the problem with Dr. Singh faces with is that he's never been reinstated now as a service provider to the scheme, regardless of the ruling going in his favor. He's still a blocked service provider. And how this thing then comes about is this point.
Meaning his patients must pay him upfront,
Yes,
and then they can claim from the scheme after.
yes. And if you go to paragraph 20 of their heads of argument, I've got that at paragraph 1884.1. And they go, I think it's what the chair made earlier. That's the methodology summarized. And that methodology for us, we say, is flawed on two levels, in the methodology itself and in the process, in that only one individual in that organization, an analyst who's not medically qualified, then reaches into the space of making determinations of even on a clinical nature to say you couldn't have done that procedure in the theater within the time. He's not qualified to do so, but he does in Dr. Singh's case. All the findings of Dr. Singh, they are clinical findings based on which they say, no, Dr. Singh, you couldn't do this. And they're not being done by a peer or somebody who's medically qualified to make those findings. So we deal with that point, and we leave it at that. And I think we've made the point. Now, what this then does is a whole lot of unintended circumstances and consequences, which the rights and the access to healthcare for patients is impaired. And we now have instances of patients who've lost their lives. And it's a publicly known case now of a lady in Mtubatuba where she was receiving dialysis treatment and Discovery blocked the service provider or the center that was providing our treatment and told her she must drive 100 k's up the road to Richards Bay to the nearest center. And they couldn't afford to do that. This one was right on her doorstep. And she was blocked from providing the service by virtue of the fact that there's a payment and a billing dispute. And there are many, many, many examples where patients with the funds, but because a dispute arises and it's a billing dispute, and the dispute is arriving from these arbitrary processes where they say, we don't recognize the supplier, your supplier of medicines. He's not a supplier of medicines that we recognized, or you are dispensing medicines that we haven't approved. Therefore, we are blacklisting you, or therefore we can no longer pay you directly. And it is not for the administrator to descend to that level of the arena, to now pontificate to the doctors what they may or may not prescribe, which medicines are approved by them, and that in itself presents problems. It is not their terrain.
Let's move on, Mr. Buthelezi.
Thank you, Chair. I then get to the point, Chair, of racial profiling, and it's a very short point.
Yes.
I'm not too sure if it is presented to you, but it is the
Where are you now in your submission?
28, Chair. Starts at paragraph 99.
Yes.
We've got this 22-page GEMS list.
I think one of my colleagues has a question to you on that list. I can't remember now if it was.
Yeah, I'll let him get started first.
Well, we cannot stand by these numbers as 100% because we've analyzed these numbers prima facie using people's names and surnames to give us an indication. But with the margin of error, if Naidu wouldn't happen to be an Indian person or Kumala wouldn't happen to be a black person, we allow for that allowance. But on that simplistic reading, on the
What would you do with Jones?
Beg your pardon?
Jones was mentioned yesterday.
Well, when we find Jones, we actually apportion Jones to where Jones' name originates from. So
then you use address.
I beg your pardon?
What do you mean where it
No,
originates from?
we presume that if Jones appears, we presume Jones to be a person who originates from where Jones' name originally originates from. So we do not, it's a presumption. It's a presumption, Commissioner.
Where does it originate from? Where does it originate from?
Jones.
Yeah.
Probably in the Bible.
Well, I don't know where Jones originates from, but it is not from this continent.
Not from this continent?
Yes.
Oh. Okay.
It is not from this continent. So it's simplistic. It's simplistic,
But I
and
mean,
because
the
we
point
don't
you're
have the
making is that
information.
if you see a name that appears neutral, you assume that's not black.
Indeed so.
Yeah, all right.
Indeed so.
So your statistics are very, very conservative.
Yes. Indeed so. And that's what we've done.
Well,
Where we
what
put-
have you done, if you can explain this table?
Well, on that list, we've got 32 dentists, okay? And 28
32 what?
dentists.
But why 32? 32 have been
We've counted
blacklisted.
them. Yes, on that list of... It's a
By
32 page.
GEMS.
Yes.
And how many dentists are contracted with GEMS?
We don't know how many are contracted with GEMS. We're just talking about this blacklist and what it represents. In other words, of all the dentists that we could identify with our simplistic methodology, we could believe with good reason to say 28 fall into the category of either being Indian or black of the 32, which constitutes like 80% of the total sample pool. And then the number goes into dietitians, optometrists, clinical psychologists, and general practitioners. So the rest of them, starting with the dental therapists, all the way down to psychiatrists, we could actually tell, for example, the physiotherapist. I mean, the one oral hygienist is 100%, it's one African person. There's no disputing it. The registered counselors, 15 of them on that list, 15 of them are African names. Registered nurses, 8 of them, 8 African names. Social workers, 33 social workers listed on that list. Make up either or, either Indian or African, and that's it. And that's the one statistic. But the most crucial statistic for me is the statistic from the Health Professionals Council, which is their recent publication on fraud cases lodged with them. This graph is from that presentation.
Sorry, just to go back to the paragraph 99. The last column, which has got percentages, what is that 88%? It's 88%, so which means it's 88% African or Indian of 32.
No, it's a percentage of the sample.
Yeah, but it's 88 of that, or your starting base is 32.
So it's 28 over 32,
Yeah,
which gives you
what
88%. So of 38, of 32 dentists listed there.
Yeah, so it's 88 of 32.
Yeah.
But isn't that the problem? What we want is the full list.
We've got it there, Jim.
No. How many dentists are contracted to GEMS?
Well, this is the people that, as a total universe of GEMS.
Precisely, yes.
Well, we don't have that number, unfortunately. What we're talking about is this notion of a blacklist. And if we look at this, the demographic and the profile of the people on this list.
I mean, I think the problem we're grappling with, if I can just put it to you plainly so that, maybe you can help in due course, is that if that 88% correlates with the total number of contracted dentists, then the statistics is neutral.
Indeed, so, Jim.
But if it is disproportionate, then the statistics might mean something.
Indeed, so, Jim.
So at the moment, what we have does not really help us to prove the case either way.
Well, between yourself and I, Chair, you're more empowered to take the point further.
Yes.
and hence the questions we've put to you earlier to say, well,
You want
this
us
is
to
the
get
lead.
that information from GEMS?
Yes,
Yes.
you can then look at the total universe. You are now in the position to then look at the entire universe and tell us that this is nonsense or this is concerning. You can then use as the judgment, because what my initial position must be was that all we seek is that the stats must be congruent with whatever the general distribution of the demographic is. If we have 100% professional nurses, all black, then it makes sense that the list will have 100% all black. But we want to have a representation of a number that fairly reflects the demographics as we have them put it out. And where the challenges comes is in the next table, Chair.
Sure.
Because,
But so at first blush, this looks problematic, but
yes,
it in and of itself doesn't establish
no, it does
racial
not.
profiling.
No, it does not. No, it does not. We cannot make that suggestion or that submission. Where it is concerning, though, is this next table for these May, June numbers. We've got the first column that talks about the complaint source. Now, in other words, there's fraud claims made by the public and made by medical aid schemes, inspectorate, legal representatives, etc. And it tells them by race category, African, Indian, white. Now, members of the public have laid, as per these stats, 11 complaints against white doctors, 5 against Indian, and 5 against African. But in that sample of 21 complaints, The white doctors are in the majority. Medical schemes, on the other hand, have laid 25 complaints against black doctors and 1 complaint against a white doctor.
25 against African,
Yes, 25 against African.
28 against black.
Well, if you combine black and African and Indian, you get 28, and you get 1 complaint against a white doctor. I can't take the point no further because our access to information is limited to things that get surfaced to the public. But this is what we are pointing to the Commission's direction to say, look, these are the things that you need looking into. And these are numbers that the HPCSA sits with. And they can produce, this is the latest number for May, June. But if you were to analyze this number beyond that point, we can take it no further. And Chair, I don't know if you have any further questions, but I think that's where the submissions end for me.
Thank you, Mr. Teles. Perhaps we should go to Dr. Mkiz. She's been waiting her turn.
Thank you, Chair. And I will conclude. Thank you, Chair. I will conclude the submission that has been made by my colleagues. This is, in our view, the biggest case of corporate fraud committed on the South African public and the medical profession as a whole that we have witnessed to date. The Council for Medical Scheme is not only complicit, but has aided and abetted this fraud by allowing the medical schemes to deliberately misinterpret the law and abuse it thereafter. They have, in essence, failed to fulfill their mandate and statutory obligation as a regulator. We therefore call upon the investigating panel to make a finding on the point, the definition of losses as contemplated under Section 59, subsection 3. We submit on a proper understanding of that the real meaning of losses is it will be clear that the medical schemes have not only acted unlawfully, but have committed a crime. So heinous against the South African public. They also stand to have their licenses immediately suspended pending the outcome of a bigger investigation to get to the very bottom of this fraud. We also call upon the Minister of Health to immediately suspend the Council for Medical Scheme, if not completely abolish it, and have its function placed under another statutory body, while its role in this fraud is also investigated. In the final analysis, we identify the following problems. 1, the forensic audit process is flawed and needs to be properly regulated by a competent regulator and endorsed by HPCSA. The desktop audits using arithmetic and other analytic software in particular have perpetuated and abused our legislation. The schemes are abusing legislation designed to eliminate fraud, waste, and abuse to enrich themselves at the expense of patients and medical practitioners. If this is not true, there should be evidence of monies recovered through audits being credited to patients. And so far, there is no such evidence. The acknowledgement of debt of more than 100,000 rand having been signed by members of NHCPA, are, in our opinion, fraudulent and unlawful. The law is clear on the point that fraud and corruption detected by the scheme must be reported to the SAPS. How is it that each of the schemes have repeatedly failed to report more than 500 millions in fraud for each year? The same misconduct should be reported to healthcare professionals' councils or the relevant statutory bodies if the quantum of fraud and corruption is that high. It is our prayer to the investigating panel to find that the schemes have contravened Regulation 6, Section 59, subsection 2, Section 59, subsection 3, and Section 66 of the Act. We pray that the investigating panel recommend the maximum sanctions as there are many healthcare providers that have lost their lives as a result of the scheme's unlawful conduct. We also pray that any person found to be in contravention of Regulation 6, Section 59.2 and Section 59.3 of the Medical Scheme Act be criminally charged in terms of Section 66.1 of the Act, read with Section 34.1 of the Act of 2004.
Okay.
Thank you.
Lastly, I would like to, as a chairperson for the National Healthcare Professional Association, to thank the panel of investigation and to also say that we have all the cases that we received, which are many. We send them to the CMS and hoping that they will reach you, and we still have also lots of bundles of those evidence. And we request that you get this acknowledgement of debts from these medical aids. That's where you'll see the bulk of the real problem. Because if you look statistically, they've made 28 billion, the BHF, they'll tell you that in their statistics last year, apparently in fraud, waste management. That's a lot of money. It's a huge figure, 28 billion. And now, if they made that 28 billion, how many people, if you look at it in 12 months?
So where do you get the 28 billion from? Because my understanding of what, I think because this is a public platform,
yes,
news can quickly spread.
Okay.
If they're not properly managed. My understanding of what BHF says is that 28 billion is the estimated loss from FWA.
Fraud. Yes, fraud.
It's not as if they have made 28 billion.
Yes, but that's what I'm saying, that if they've lost that money,
I see.
Yes, if they've lost that money, that's my point. Yeah. Yes. So we have requested that you get that, and also the be cognizant of the fact that the HPSA list, like I said, it might not be the same with the list that they have, but that's a good part about it because it will emphasize this point that I'm saying, that most of the people that get reported is those who refuse to sign this acknowledgement of debts. Those who sign this acknowledgement of debts, majority of them, they do not report them. So you might get that information. We want to investigate also why those people that they had made to sign acknowledgement of debt, they were not reported to the council or to their relevant authorities. Because that's very important. And the reason, another thing is we asked the medical aids when we met at the Human Rights Commission, do they investigate all the frauds that's flagged by their algorithms? They said no. They only investigate some. But that it's because we're asking them because we know that majority of the people that they investigate, they're investing the black ones. So it doesn't mean that the algorithm probably doesn't flag our white counterpart, but because maybe of whatever reason that they have, they don't investigate them. And the chairperson even said to them, but fraud is fraud. Even if it's R5 or it's committed by whoever, it must be investigated. So we are saying no to fraud by all healthcare professionals. And if we indeed want to uproot fraud, we need to act seriously. We can't wishy-washy about it. If it's indeed fraud, we can't be talking, you say you are losing 28 billion, and then you're not doing anything about it. You are just encouraging people to sign acknowledgement of that year in and year out. You don't report it to the relevant authorities if they pay you back. You don't report it to the police. There's nothing that is structured to combat the behavior. So we believe that that is not right. And it took us, it's coercion and extortion. Because they know what we have realized is, as administrators, if they pay you more money, they will come for you. All the practices which have few medical aids, they are never visited. But if you see lots of patients, and there are horrible things that we can share with you, where they will phone your wife and ask, what time does your husband come home? Why is he seeing 35 patients? Yes. And I mean, that's abuse. And we are saying, let's respect each other. Let the patients be respected. Let the medical aids be respected, and let the healthcare professionals be respected, so that we have a proper healthcare system in our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Dr. Kumete. I want to thank your association, the National Healthcare Providers Association, not only for your efforts in ensuring that this panel is set up, but also in coming through with your presentation, which has been very enlightening and indeed helpful to us. So you might be requested for more information, you might be called back for clarity, and you might be called back for other engagements on a bilateral basis with the panel.
Check.
Yes, Mr. Buthelezi.
I've got an additional instruction. Not that
You have an
additional instruction that I have to make regarding the process going forward from my clients. We want the money back.
So you have an instruction.
To say, he's asked me to make this point on his behalf.
Oh, I see. What's the point?
Not that the point is to solicit the money, not to solicit a response from the panel. He says we couldn't leave here without having made this point. And the point is, we want this money back. And we are going to fetch this money. And in fetching this money, Chair, we're also going to fetch government money, which government is a contributor to the schemes. And if fraudulent money or fraud is committed against government, after we part here from you, our next appointment is with the Office of the Public Protector to look into possibly government monies or state monies from government employees and state-owned enterprises that have been unlawfully withheld by the schemes. And thereafter, we may find our way to the courts to quantify the money that is due to us based on these points. Thank you, Chair.
Good luck. The session is adjourned until tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Tomorrow being the 1st of August, we will start with the with the South African Medical Association exactly at 10 o'clock. And then in the afternoon, we will have the Independent Practitioners Association Foundation. We are adjourned.
Thank you.